Good afternoon and welcome to the De Young Museum. Thank you for joining us. I'd like to begin by thanking our European Director of Arts Council for supporting today's lecture, which will provide fascinating insights on our wonderful collection of sculpture by Auguste Rodin at the Legion of Honor, of which we are extremely proud. And we're so excited to be joined today by Juliet Bellow. Juliet is Associate Professor of Art History at American University, Washington, D.C. An expert in modern art and ballet history, she is the author of Rodin's Dancers, Art and Performance in Belle Époque Paris, which was published just last year. And here I have a copy. It is available to buy in the museum shop after the lecture. Juliet has also published in the Art Bulletin, Art Journal, American Art, and Modernism, Modernity, and contributed essays to several edited volumes. She was a consulting scholar for the 2013 exhibition Diaghilev and the Ballets Russes, 1909 to 1929, at the National Gallery of Art, and has contributed essays to exhibition catalogues for Tate Modern, Musée d'Art Moderne de la Ville de Paris, the Musée d'Orsay, the Philadelphia Museum of Art, and the Courtauld Institute of Art, and of course the Musée Rodin in Paris. And I've recently learned that Juliet is in fact a Bay Area local originally. So this is something of a homecoming for her. Please join me in welcoming Juliet.
Thank you so much, David, and thanks to all your colleagues here at the Fine Arts Museums of San Francisco for this invitation. As David said, it's particularly meaningful to me as a Bay Area native who began to learn about Auguste Rodin at the Sculpture Garden at Stanford, which many of you may know, and which I recall many memorable visits to, including one in which my friends and I tried to do 666 jumping jacks in front of the gates of hell to see if they would open. They didn't. I'm very moved and honored to have so many family, friends, former students here. There's one person that many of you know is a kind of absent presence here today, and that is my mother, Juliet Bellow. And so this is for her. In February 1889, the British periodical The Poster ran a story entitled La Loïe Fuller and Her Artistic Advertisements that extolled the dancer-choreographer's success in the arena of self-promotion. Praising Fuller's decision to seek out Jules Chéret, inventor of the genre known as the artistic poster, to publicize her performances at the Folies Bergère Music Hall, the author of this article argued that, quote, artistic advertisement is of all the methods of publicity the most surely effective, unquote. The text went on to enumerate Fuller's fan base among, quote, those Frenchmen who in science, art, and letters are adding to the intellectual dignity of the human race, unquote, including writers such as Dumas fils, men of science such as Camille Flammarion, and artists such as Rodin, who may fairly be considered the greatest sculptor since Michelangelo, unquote. This article detailed and itself exemplified Fuller's sophisticated marketing techniques. It constituted an undisguised advertisement that openly celebrated the value of publicity, whose glowing descriptions of Fuller's achievements were almost certainly dictated by the dancer herself. At the same time, the text emphatically positioned Fuller as an artist, a move that seems designed to separate her and her work from the realm of commerce. Noting the ingenuity and deliberation that she brought to her craft, the author differentiated Fuller from the, quote, ordinary dancing girl, including the innumerable imitators of her famous serpentine dance. The article thereby raised her to a rarefied status. It put her close to, if not fully on par with, her prominent male supporters, including the sculptor Auguste Rodin. I came across this article while researching my book, Rodin's Dancers, Art and Performance in Belle Époque Paris. When I read it, I realized that it could help me solve a problem I'd been struggling with: how to write a book about a towering figure in the history of modern art that is also not, or not just, a book about that artist. And this is my own artistic advertisement for that book. I knew that the book would, in part, be about how dancers like Loïe Fuller impacted Rodin's art. It would explore how their choreographies prompted Rodin to experiment with artistic form and process, finding new novel uses of the human instrument in sculpture, as well as in drawing and photography. It would consider also how these performers' stagecraft recalibrated Rodin's approach to the scenography of his art, encouraging him to employ new techniques and venues of display. And perhaps more importantly, it would show how these dancers became central to the construction of Rodin's artistic identity, fueling his rise to fame as the greatest sculptor since Michelangelo. But I was equally keen to turn the tables and look at Rodin from these dancers' point of view, to consider how he inspired their creative endeavors and to underscore his role in their public self-fashioning. The book focuses on three main case studies of the dancers and companies with whom Rodin associated himself most closely, from left to right. Fuller, the American-born performer who in the 1890s pioneered a new form of solo art dance involving light, color, and motion. The Cambodian Royal Ballet, whose 1906 performances in France spurred the canonization of Cambodian court dance as a classical art and as an embodiment of the nation. And Václav Nijinsky, the star dancer and choreographer for the Ballets Russes troupe, who revolutionized the practice and reputation of ballet. Sculpture, including Rodin's, allowed these performers to invent new dance forms by abstracting the figure, isolating body parts, or foregrounding stillness as a choreographic element. At a moment when dance was seen as merely a form of popular entertainment, these figures also used their association with Rodin to position their performances as high art. Trading on the currency that his name carried, they sought to make his favor for them widely known, even if being one of Rodin's dancers meant that his artistic stardom inevitably upstaged theirs. And you can see here that Rodin is always the center of attention. He is always called the celebrated, the great artist, right? So by broadcasting their connection to this modern master, these dancers designated themselves as artists of similarly high standing. Collectively, and with Rodin's help, they effected a profound shift in perceptions of dance, raising its cultural prestige to the level of sculpture and other arts. In short, I wish to challenge existing art historical narratives that relegated these figures to the margins of the great man's career, while at the same time acknowledging the very real power differentials between them, which were rooted not only in hierarchies of medium, but also of gender, sexual orientation, race, and nationality. To move toward an approach that would treat these dancers as active participants in a process of mutual exchange, I would have to forego some of the objects, questions, and values that typically guide art historical inquiry. To give you a sense of what that kind of interpretation looks like, I'll now turn back to Fuller's relationship with Rodin. We know from correspondence, appointment books, and snapshots preserved at the Musée Rodin in Paris that the two became acquainted sometime in the mid-1890s and were in touch pretty regularly after that. You can see here at right a postcard that Fuller sent to Rodin from the U.S., where she mentions San Francisco. And this is probably in reference to the Panama Pacific International Exposition that took place here in 1915. During the period of their acquaintance, Rodin collected over 100 photographs of Fuller, including the one that you see here at left, which she dedicated to him. He, in turn, gifted her several sculptures, such as this reduced-size cast of his famous Thinker, which he inscribed to her. And there are several examples of such sculptures given to Rodin by Rodin to Fuller in the collection of the Legion of Honor. Fuller also organized exhibitions of Rodin's sculpture in the U.S., including at the 1915 exposition, and she connected him with wealthy American patrons like Alma de Bretteville Spreckels, the socialite and philanthropist who, as I'm sure many of you know, was instrumental in the founding of the Legion of Honor and amassing its exceptional collection of Rodin's sculptures. But Rodin never sculpted Fuller, and this is perhaps why she rarely occupies a prominent place in accounts of his career. The fact that he didn't sculpt her is a bit of a mystery, given their close, albeit sort of on-again, off-again relationship, as well as the fact that so many other artists did. Fuller was one of the most ubiquitous figures in French art of the 1890s and early 1900s. You can see how Henri de Toulouse-Lautrec used the irregular curves of Fuller's billowing silk costume to play with shape and space in this beautiful lithograph at center, one of a series that I'm led to believe the Fine Arts Museums of San Francisco just acquired an example from that same series, so you can see this in person potentially sometime soon. Or we can see how Théodore Rivière capitalized on the torque of Fuller's body and the rippling folds of her costume to create this dynamic, nearly abstract sculptural composition at right. The fact that Rodin didn't follow suit is even more intriguing because we know that Fuller really wanted him to sculpt her. Surviving letters reveal that she badgered him for more than a year to produce a work that she wanted to display at her pavilion for the 1900 Paris Exposition Universelle. She may even have hoped that she could put his sculpture above its entrance like a sort of shop sign or a billboard. And as I was preparing this talk, it sort of occurred to me that it might be something like the huge image of Carol Doda that used to be hung outside of the Condor. So I am guessing from the giggles that some people will remember that, but if you don't remember that, then just ask somebody who's sitting next to you. In the end, Fuller turned to the sculptor Pierre Roche, whose sculpture of her was hung in that very spot. And you can see that the small copy here at left is a version of that composition, and this copy is in the FAMSF collection, as is the poster that you see here at right. It's pretty easy to understand why Fuller wanted Rodin to make her that sculpture. A likeness of her by this internationally acclaimed artist would have been a big draw, as well as an implicit endorsement on Rodin's part of Fuller's own artistic bona fides. We don't know why Rodin didn't make it. He never put anything about her request in writing, necessitating some speculation as to his reasons. I'd argue that his refusal tells us a great deal about the image of himself that Rodin wanted to project, and about the risk that a sculpture of Fuller might pose to that persona. It certainly wasn't because he avoided the limelight. Rodin was just as avid a self-publicist as Fuller, and like her, he carefully managed public conversation about himself and his work, most notably when he would stir controversy, as with his statue of the novelist Honoré de Balzac, for which he was excoriated when he exhibited it at the annual Paris Salon in 1898. Rodin took particular pains to emphasize his own achievements in the prestigious craft of monumental statuary in order to distance himself from his origins as a designer of luxury objects such as vases and furniture. You can see here at center an example of a vase designed by him and produced by the Sèvres Manufactory. Importantly, Fuller was a favorite subject for these kinds of mass market commodities, such as the statuettes, lamps, and vases that you see here, which exemplify the popular Art Nouveau aesthetic at the time. These artists all make very creative use of the whiplash curves formed by Fuller's draperies to create the undulating decorative patterns that meander across these various sculptural objects. Because of their diminutive size, their utilitarian purpose, and their association with domestic settings, objects like this were cast as feminine relative to the more masculine, higher status genre of large-scale civic sculpture. Rodin might have found this project emasculating for other reasons as well. Though Fuller always referred to him quite respectfully as maître or master, she was by all accounts a forceful, determined professional woman, that is to say, one who refused to conform to gender norms of the period. Rodin also knew her well enough to be aware that Fuller was a lesbian who lived more or less openly with her partner Gabriele Bloch. For all these reasons, I'd surmise, Fuller threatened Rodin's ability to stage himself as the prototypical male artist of genius. However, the absence of that sculpture does not mean that Fuller played a minor role in Rodin's art. I believe that he perceived strong parallels between her choreography and his sculptural aesthetic, that he saw her experimentation with the expressive possibilities of spiraling motion, abstract form, and matter in flux as akin to his own creative use of those elements. The drawing at center seems to explore such points of intersection. The pencil and pen marks that whirl around this figure's body clearly recall the floating draperies that Fuller set in motion when dancing. The bright pink and yellow splashes of watercolor evoke the colored lights she used in her performances, and I'll tell you a little bit more about her dance technique in just a moment. This figure's body, however, looks nothing like Fuller. Rodin seems to have superimposed a nude torso into the drawing, one that looks very much like his composition Thunderstruck Damned Woman, which you see here at right. In essence, Rodin created a sort of mashup between his work and hers, and this sort of remixing process is very much in keeping with the way that Rodin worked on his sculptures. So perhaps Rodin was even using this drawing to think through how he might make a sculpture of Fuller, although, again, we'll never know for sure. And I take it to be significant that the face of this dancing figure is completely occluded by smudge marks, as if Rodin wanted or needed to deny the dancer's individuality. The existence of this mashup drawing invites us to consider broader, less direct correspondences between these two makers' respective arts. For example, we might note their shared use of a torquing movement in the torso, which allows each of them to play with shape, line, and gravity. I feel sure that Rodin recognized those kinds of parallels, that the reason Fuller's dance interested him was because it mirrored back to him some aspects of his own sculptural aesthetic and helped him to see that style in new ways. I'd argue, moreover, that Fuller's talent in the area of artistic advertisement had an equally, if not more, significant effect on Rodin's career. Her innovative methods of staging reshaped Rodin's approach to the way he photographed and exhibited his sculptures. And as we will see, her influence was most apparent in the pavilion that Rodin created for himself at the 1900 Exposition Universelle, just steps away from hers. So let me back up for a moment. What was it about Fuller's dance that so appealed to artists like Rodin and to the general viewing public? In 1892, Fuller invented a new dance technique that used costuming and stagecraft to transform her body into a spectacle of light and color in perpetual transformation. She wore a long white robe with a pair of handheld cane-shaped batons hidden beneath it, which she used to throw the fabric of her costume into the air and manipulate it to create a constantly changing series of shapes, some of which formed motifs such as flowers, butterflies, or fire. This performance appeared ethereal, but it demanded strength and stamina. By sweeping her trunk in a figure-8 motion along the diagonal, Fuller gathered sufficient force to hurtle yards of silk fabric into the air before whipping it down. With subtle inflections of direction in her upper body, Fuller created the asymmetrical arabesques that became her hallmark. She also employed a system of lighting that rendered her body into a projection screen for an intricately choreographed sequence of colored rays, changed by stagehands at intervals that were signaled by taps of her feet. She later got the nickname the Electric Fairy. In the early 1890s, she started with gas lighting, and then it was only around 1900 that she began to incorporate electric light, which had a kind of brightness and whiteness that that really, I think, made the colors of her performance pop, and that was, increasingly available across Paris at this time. This performance mixed recognizable features of what we would call high art with elements of lowbrow popular culture. Fuller elevated this dance form by publishing manifestos and delivering lectures on her craft in which she stressed its artistic originality. She also purposively aligned it with arts that had a more elite status. As you can see here, her use of shape and color put her dance in dialogue with the abstracting tendencies in vanguard art of the time, and she may even have incorporated these elements because she knew it would appeal to these artists. In other words, she was courting their attention, right, and inviting them to depict her. This is surely also why she sought out Jules Chéret to make her posters. Like Fuller's dance, Chéret's poster aesthetic aligned with that of the avant-garde. It featured bold colors applied in large, flat areas and stylized, dynamic arrangements of the human figure. But Fuller's dance also borrowed from popular forms of entertainment featured in the déclassé music halls where she performed, including the Folies Bergère. The way that Fuller manipulated her garment, for instance, drew upon skirt dancing, a titillating genre in which the performer kicked and twirled to expose her petticoats, as well as a form that was called the nautch, a term then used to refer to various dances originating from India, including ones in which the performer's swaying or spinning movements would lift and spin the circumference of their long robe. With all of these references to high and low cultural forms, Fuller benefited from the cachet of the former, even as she exploited the appeal of the latter. And arguably, for that reason, she was sort of a lot like Toulouse-Lautrec and Chéret. The question of whether Fuller's dance counted as art figured centrally in her dogged attempts to claim legal ownership over it. From the moment that she debuted the Serpentine dance, numerous performers across Europe and the United States sought to cash in on its popularity in staged and in filmed versions. There are a lot of these films, and often the dancers in them are misidentified as Fuller. So if all of you take only one piece of information away from this lecture, it should be that Loïe Fuller was never filmed performing the Serpentine dance. So none of these are Loïe Fuller. And she would be very mad to know that she keeps being, sort of misidentified. Fuller tried to quash these other Serpentine dancers whom she regarded as imitators of her proprietary creations. She successfully applied for patents for elements of her staging, such as her garment and batons. You can see her application here. However, she failed to win copyright protection in a suit of injunction against a rival dancer named Minnie Bemis that she brought in the U.S. Circuit Court for the Southern District of New York. The bill of complaint contended that Fuller was, quote, the author, inventor, designer, and proprietor of a dramatic composition known as the Serpentine Dance, unquote, a description that conflated artistic with entrepreneurial conceptions of creativity and innovation. The judge ultimately denied Fuller's claim on the grounds that her dance did not qualify as a dramatic composition, being instead, quote, merely mechanical movements by which effects are produced on stage, unquote. And it may be surprising to know that, in fact, it was not until the 1970s that full copyright protection was extended to dance works. With this ruling, the judge rejected the premise that undergirded Fuller's legal claim, that is, that a choreographer is an artist. Fuller stood a better chance of success in the court of public opinion, thus making the support of prominent artists and writers vital to her effort. It is for this reason, I believe, that Fuller hatched the plan to entice Rodin to sculpt her and began to send him photographs of her, possibly to offer him ideas about how that sculpture should look. The photographs that she sent him are not the typical carte de visite that were widely available for purchase at that time, which depict Fuller either frontally or at a neat 3/4 angle and evenly lit. You can see an example here at left. The more artistic pictures in Rodin's collection employed off-center perspectives, cropping, chiaroscuro, and blurring effects. In most cases, Fuller must have invented poses and actions specifically calculated to produce the image that we see in the photograph. We have to keep in mind that photographic technologies at the time tended to take fairly long exposure periods. Snapshot photography was very, new and not very widespread. When making these photographs, Fuller likely acted as both the performer and the director or impresario, dictating the placement of the camera, the lighting scheme, and other elements to achieve the desired effects, as she did on stage. As with the choice of Chéret to make posters for her, she must have selected her photographers with care, and she may even have been aware of the ways that different materials and processing methods affected the resulting image. This is evident in a series of photographs attributed to one Art Moreau, about whom we know very little, unfortunately, all of which Fuller gave to Rodin. In this shot from the series, Fuller appears with her arms outstretched, as if running toward the camera, creating a pose that resembles the famous Nike of Samothrace. The force of Fuller's body presses against her garment, outlining the volumes of her torso and creating waves in the fabric that trails behind her. Motion slightly softens the appearance of her figure so that the edges of her body melt into the surrounding atmosphere. A lamp positioned just beneath the picture's bottom edge scatters pockets of highlight and shadow across her form, refiguring our perceptions of solid and void. In the upper right corner, Fuller scribbled a caption that provides polite but quite assertive instructions for magnifying this visual effect. View from a distance. There are several photographs in the collection of the Musée Rodin that Fuller jotted little notes to him on, but her French was really terrible, and so the messages are often a little bit garbled. Fuller dedicated another picture by Moreau with the same caption to the painter-printmaker Eugène Carrière. This photograph eventually made its way into Rodin's collection, possibly after Carrière's death in 1906 when Rodin served as the executor of his estate. Arguably, the extreme blurring in this photograph captures the continual movement of the dancer's robes better than any other still image, especially if you view from a distance, as Fuller advised. This effect may have been enhanced by the use of a technique called bromoil, in which the photographic print is immersed in water during the processing phase so that the gelatin swells to create a hazy effect. The resulting atmospheric sfumato quality looks much like Carrière's signature style. Fuller seems to stress that similarity by labeling the photograph à la Carrière, or in the manner of Carrière. As Fuller may have known, Rodin's and Carrière's work were often compared. The critic Camille Mauclair, for example, wrote that, quote, Rodin paints in marble and Carrière sculpts in shadows, unquote. And we'll see that Mauclair was also a great champion of Fuller's dance. By styling herself à la Carrière, then, Fuller indirectly compared her performances to Rodin's sculptures. In the mid-1890s, when Rodin began to collect these images of Fuller, a dramatic change occurred in his approach to photographing his sculptures. Previously, his works were pictured from more conventional angles, front, back, or side, and evenly lit, as you can see at left. Suddenly, we begin to see a much more dynamic use of light, of framing, and perspective to create pictures in which Rodin's sculptures appear uncannily animate. These photographs employ many of the techniques we see in the photographs of Fuller, and Rodin worked with several of the same photographers, including Eugène Drouet, who made these two works on the right. The transformative effect of these principles is visible, for example, in Drouet's 1898 photograph of Rodin's famous composition, The Kiss, which you see here at center. The sculpture is situated in the middle of the picture on a diagonal axis between the open window in the upper left corner and another sculpture elevated on a table or a platform that is cropped by the lower right corner of the frame. The shot is taken from a low point of view and at an oblique angle. This vantage throws the composition off balance and maximizes its implied movement. The woman's body appears to curve away from the viewer as if folding into the man's embrace, and her lifted heel seems about to pull away from the sculpture's base. The beams of light that stream through the window heighten this effect. The play of light and shadow so transforms sculptural matter that the lovers almost come to life. In Drouet's photograph at right, Rodin's Eve takes on a similar animacy. Light glints off the body's edges, immersing its core in darkness. The pose appears as if in the process of unfolding, with the woman's head craning toward the chest, her arms tightening their grip around the torso, her knee rising up, her foot lifting off the ground. One great detail about this photograph that you can probably see is that not only did Drouet sign it, this is Drouet's signature, but here Rodin signed it as if he's sort of signing the base of his sculpture. So the signature in a way is both Rodin claiming the sculpture, but also claiming the photograph, I think. This Pygmalion-like simulation of movement is most palpable in a series of pictures where Rodin staged tableaux that feature multiple sculptures that are previously unrelated to one another. These photographs constitute provisional artworks in themselves, works that are at once sculptural and performative or choreographic. In this one, Rodin's bust of Victor Hugo looks down from a high pedestal to face two plaster casts of meditation. The latter are placed with their backs facing the lens, oriented similarly, but the copy at the far left is rotated just a bit further away from the spectator. It also appears to be smaller than the other cast, so that our eye perceives it as being further back in space. The effect of this placement is that we can imagine these either as two bodies, a sort of corps de ballet performing simultaneously, or as one figure seen in successive positions, as if the dancer is turning and advancing toward or away from the viewer. Another picture like this also uses meditation, now engaged in a sort of pas de deux with the large shade or atom. Once assembled as a duo, the sculptures appear to interact, their poses responding to one another. The leftward curve of her body is complemented by the rightward sway of his. Together, they dance. At precisely this time, Rodin also began to experiment with achieving these kinds of effects in exhibitions of his work. Like many of his peers, Rodin was fed up with the notoriously awful conditions of display at the annual Paris Salon exhibition. Up to 1848, the Salon's sculpture galleries were located in the dank basement of the Louvre, a site that the critic Théophile Gautier called a morgue that housed the, quote, marble cadavers of former gods, unquote. Even after 1857, when the Salon relocated to the Palais de l'Industrie, the cavernous structure that was built for the 1855 Exposition Universelle, sculptors fared no better. Period photographs like this one at left capture row upon row of sculptures placed on pedestals of even height, blanched by glaring overhead illumination. When we look at photographs like this, it's no wonder that the critic Charles Baudelaire titled his review of the 1846 Salon, "Why Sculpture is Boring." In the late 1890s, Rodin decided that he'd had enough. He'd organize his own exhibitions where he could exert greater control over the selection, arrangement, and illumination of his works. The photograph at right gives us a sense of that visual experience at Rodin's first ever one-person exhibition, which was staged at the Maison d'Art in Brussels in 1899. Unlike the Salon, the spacing and viewing level here is irregular. Most large sculptures are placed close to the floor, while smaller sculptures sit on large bases of varying material and height. Each work is positioned to direct the viewer's eye around the room through movements, poses, or gestures such as turning heads, extended arms, and twisting trunks. This setup also creates formal echoes between Rodin's compositions. For example, the placement of Rodin's Eve at the center of the room with meditation just a few feet away emphasized their similarities and enhanced their illusion of movement. This aligns with the way Rodin described the ideal viewing experience of his sculpture, quote, "When the spectator allows his eye to wander from one edge of my sculpture to another, he sees their gestures developing," unquote. This context helps us to more fully appreciate why Rodin didn't make a sculpture depicting Fuller and how he applied the aesthetic of her serpentine dance to his own ends, as well as the lessons that he learned from her use of artistic advertisements. Instead of helping Fuller to promote her pavilion at the 1900 Exposition Universelle, Rodin built himself an exhibition hall to house his first ever retrospective in Paris. Located on the Place de l'Alma, it was just outside the exposition grounds, about a half a block away from Fuller's pavilion and the other entertainments on offer. You can see here in this map just how close they were. Rodin himself devised the business plan for this venture, he carefully curated the arrangement of his works, and he courted positive press coverage during its 6-month run. He would, every time a critic would write something about him that he liked, he would write to them and say, "Would you like to meet with me?" In an interview published just before its opening, Rodin contrasted the viewing experience of his exhibition with what he called the deplorably misguided habits of the annual Salon. While the latter forced sculptors to cater to, quote, "a specific angle of illumination," unquote, Rodin's exhibition space featured large arched windows that were covered by white scrims to create bright but gentle illumination that he said, quote, "flowed plentifully over all sides," unquote, of his sculptures. He would also not squeeze his works against one another because, and that's a quote from him, He didn't want to squeeze his works against one another because he opined, quote, a sculpture should have around it its own atmosphere, a distinct zone of liberty permitting the visitor to examine it under its varied aspects, unquote. It's important to recognize, right, in this day and age, sort of a solo exhibition for an artist is very common. But it was quite a novelty in this period when group shows like the Salon or the Impressionist exhibitions of the 1870s and 80s still remained the norm. Rodin's contemporaries certainly did. He was, as you can see in this caricature here at left, mocked for calling so much attention to himself. The caricaturist Guillaume portrayed Rodin as a carnival barker, urging passersby to enter his booth. The caption predicted that in addition to lectures by famous art critics, Rodin's exhibition would feature showgirls hanging from the ceiling and nightly fireworks displays. Published months before the exhibition opened, this caricature was totally speculative, but as it turns out, it was not that far off the mark. In orchestrating this event, Rodin borrowed several of Fuller's publicity techniques to attract visitors. For example, he commissioned an artistic poster from his friend Carrière. In the portrait at the center of the poster, Carrière used his signature style to great effect. The moody atmosphere and dramatic contrasts of light and dark cast Rodin as a visionary genius from whose hands emerged a sculptural form that hovers on the edge between abstraction and figuration. As Guillaume predicted, Rodin also brought in friendly critics to write the exhibition catalog and to give lectures in the galleries. Tellingly, the critics he chose had written extensively on Fuller, including reviews of her 1900 pavilion. And so I've juxtaposed two passages by the aforementioned critic Camille Mauclair here, and I hope you can see that his descriptions of Rodin's exhibition sounded remarkably like his descriptions of Fuller's dance. According to Mauclair, Rodin began sculpting with a faithful representation of the human form, which he progressively abstracted. He stressed how light, space, and atmosphere enhanced this process of abstraction. These elements seem to dissolve the sculpture's substance and make its contours appear permeable or vibratory. Through such ephemeral effects, Rodin's sculpture seemed to, quote, liberate itself, unquote, from its own materiality. And it's important, I think, to remember that this was a lecture. So you have to imagine Mauclair saying this in the gallery surrounded by Rodin's sculptures. Note the resonances that between that passage and the one about Fuller. Watching her dance, he remarks, we see, quote, the image of a human developing, unquote. As with Rodin, light, space, and motion transform our perceptions of the body so that Fuller's dance became sculptural, like a living plaster or incandescent statuary, one of the greatest descriptions, I think, of her dance of all time. Such analogies between Rodin's sculpture and Fuller's dance emerge in particular in critics' descriptions of his Gates of Hell, which he showed publicly for the first time ever at this exhibition. The work's placement at the terminus of his pavilion make clear that Rodin intended this work to be the show's climactic finale. In many ways, this is a surprising choice. This work was originally commissioned in 1880 by the French Ministry of Fine Arts to be installed in a brand new museum of decorative art. But when plans for that museum stalled, the project went dormant, and Rodin more or less stopped working on it in 1887. However, in June 1899, as he and Fuller both began to plan their respective pavilions, he started working on it again. He employed 20 assistants entirely at his own expense to recast all of the figures that appear on the central panels. At the last minute, though, Rodin decided to remove nearly all of the high relief figures, leaving the central panels visibly incomplete. This decision has always stumped Rodin scholars. It's usually explained away as the result of overwork or bad timing. With so much on the line for Rodin, those kinds of explanations ring hollow. As the scholar David Getze has argued, quote, the exhibition of the Gates in this state could be nothing other than polemical in effect, unquote. By removing most of the figures, Rodin made the central panels into an almost totally non-representational sculpture. Getze describes it as raw, unformed sculptural matter that symbolizes the creative process itself. However, this rippling, activated surface is also strongly reminiscent of the visual and kinesthetic effects that Fuller achieved in her dance. It dips and swerves like fabric animated by bodily movement. And while at first glance it does appear totally abstract, if you scan its surface, you begin to see partial vestiges of the human form embedded in its crests and crevices. A pair of legs here, a fragment of a torso there. This gradual process of discovery would have been especially dramatic under the lighting conditions that, according to Rodin's early biographer Judith Claudel, the sculptor felt best suited the gates, that is, artificial illumination from below. Could this be Rodin's sculpture of Fuller? A description of the gates published by the critic André Fontenas, an acquaintance of Rodin, seems to encourage such an interpretation. He talks about swells and folds that seem to palpitate, as well as the animating effects of a reflective play of light. This is not a static composition, he seems to say, but something that's constantly changing before our eyes, just like the serpentine dance. You may have noticed one important difference between what these critics say about Rodin and Fuller. In his essay, Mauclair directly compared Fuller to a statue by Rodin. He calls her, quote, a figure such as the ones dreamt and solidified by Rodin's genius, unquote. By contrast, neither he, Fontenas, or any other critic at the time directly mentioned Fuller in their descriptions of Rodin. She was a prominent but pointedly unnamed subtext to his exhibition. Ironically, this move reveals how indebted Rodin was to the way Fuller presented herself and her work. As one newspaper informed its readers, Rodin's retrospective was just, quote, a step from the sideshows of the Rue de Paris, unquote, the section of the Exposition Universelle that was devoted to popular entertainment. The Rue de Paris featured a cabaret, a tableau vivant display, film showings, of course, very new, and a Grand Guignol, or horror show, as well as Fuller's Pavilion, which housed both a performance hall and a gallery filled with depictions of her. Just as at the Folies Bergère, then, Fuller used the entertainments that surrounded her pavilion as a foil for her more artistic displays. Rodin then turned this strategy back on her. He built his exhibition hall on a site proximate to her theater museum, where he staged his artworks in a manner that subtly evoked her dance style. At the same time, he positioned the Exposition Rodin as an elevated alternative to the nearby fairground entertainments and attractions, including Fuller's Pavilion. This move paid off. A newspaper article about his exhibition described it as an artistic alternative to the rest of the exposition, a, quote, refuge of silence and pure beauty, unquote, that was, and a quote again, far from the belly dances, the cheap orients, and the tawdry indies, unquote, on offer at the rest of the exposition. So perhaps not surprisingly, this passage associates the commercialism of something like a World's Fair with the gendered and racial sort of otherness. And it's a reminder that the term lowbrow itself actually has its origins in the racialized pseudosciences of the 19th century, like craniometry. Rodin's Pavilion, that is, functioned as an artistic advertisement, designed to benefit from its proximity to Fuller's dance while also separating itself from her and from the world of popular entertainment. Even as Rodin encouraged the viewing public to see his exhibition as Fulleresque, he studiously avoided too close an alignment of his sculpture with her spectacular performances. By conjuring Fuller without directly referring to her, Rodin capitalized on her popularity while remaining the star of the show. Fuller must have been disappointed by Rodin's refusal to make her a sculpture for her pavilion, but she was not deterred. In 1903, she tried a different way of associating herself with Rodin. She curated an exhibition of his sculptures at the National Arts Club in New York, where she also performed her serpentine dance. The New York Tribune announced in an article about this exhibition that, quote, Miss Fuller has a great admiration for Rodin and has more pieces by him in plaster and in bronze than have ever been shown at one time in this country, unquote. The Times claimed that Fuller's dances, quote, created a veritable furor among the Paris artists, unquote, and that, quote, many sculptors, including Rodin, have attempted to model the impression made by her floating draperies, unquote. These sorts of misleading accounts, and I'm, again, sure that Fuller told these newspaper authors many of these things, these sorts of misleading accounts created a rhetorical link between her collection of Rodin sculptures and the dances that she performed at local vaudeville halls like Hyde and Beeman's in Brooklyn and at the National Arts Club, a performance with which the Tribune described as, quote, an intellectual and emotional form of dance, which is probably new in the modern world, unquote. In other words, a work of art. Once it became clear that Rodin would not sculpt her, Fuller tried yet another track. In 1909, she debuted a piece called Hand Dance. This dance was performed only a few times, and little concrete information about it survives, apart from a series of related photographs that capture Fuller's hands in close focus, cropped and positioned against a black background so that they appear disembodied. In publicity for the hand dance, Fuller presented this piece as a collaboration of sorts with the sculptor. As you can see, a short feature in The Sketch, which was published on December 22nd, 1909, was entitled Dancing with the Hands, an act suggested by Rodin. It featured 4 photographs of Fuller's hands in various positions, accompanied by a caption claiming that these new dances, quote, were suggested to Miss Fuller by Rodin, who said, the soul expresses itself through each and every part of the human form. A hand separated from the body can express its joys, its sorrows, its grief, with as great perfection as the complete form of man, unquote. In the hand dance, Fuller paid homage to Rodin and positioned herself as both a sculptor and a sculpture worthy of the master. Whether the concept for this work did indeed originate with Rodin, as the caption in The Sketch intimated, or whether Fuller invented Rodin's involvement can never be ascertained, although we do know that 4 of the photographs of Fuller's hands eventually made their way into Rodin's collection. It is clear, however, that Fuller wanted her reference to Rodin's art to be unmistakable. Indeed, she may have studied specific sculptures in preparation for this dance. The hand positions in some of these photographs mirror quite precisely some of Rodin's hand sculptures, such as the one that you see here on the screen. By activating Rodin's hands through performance, Fuller's hand dance also extended these sculptures' implicit motion. Many of these hand sculptures were mounted on bases when they entered museum collections, but during Rodin's lifetime, he often left them lying loose so that he or others could pick them up and move them around. The art historian Leo Steinberg has argued that Rodin's refusal to fix these sculptures in place constituted his greatest challenge to sculptural convention. By allowing their position in space to remain changeable and indeterminate, he invented a new kind of sculpture, one capable of embodying the contingency and ephemerality that is often identified as a key hallmark of modern art. Loïe Fuller's hand dance makes a similar point. This work demonstrates that Rodin's sculptures can dance, and it also suggests that he needed Fuller to help him make them perform. Thank you very much. If anybody has any questions, you're more than welcome to ask them. There's always a pause after a lecture when people are, collecting their thoughts. So,
hi, that was very illuminating.
Thank you. Great words. Thank you. Yes.
So Loïe seemed to understand photography, and I was just wondering, was she a photographer or did she come to understand it because of how she used it?
Thank you. That's a great question. She was not, as far as I know, there's no evidence that she herself experimented with photography. But I think that she was extremely savvy about how media like photography and film might mediate what she looked like on stage. That's why I think she didn't want to have her dance filmed because she knew that the sort of technologies existing for film at that time would not capture what it actually looked like. And it also, of course, doesn't capture the sort of kinesthetic embodied sense of of her doing it live in front of you. I think that she saw photography as an important and useful tool for disseminating images of herself, like a sort of poster or any other kind of medium. And I think that she was very interested and up on all sorts of scientific sort of discoveries and innovations. So I think she was a pretty sort of self-aware consumer of sort of these photographic images. I'm pretty sure that she was very sort of thoughtful about who she wanted to work with. And as I said, I'm guessing that she probably also, had a pretty major hand in sort of what happened in those photographic sessions, because given sort of what photographs could do at the time, she couldn't just sort of do her act and have it photographed. She had to actually sort of think about what could she do that would maybe look like her dance, right? So sort of what she's performing in front of a camera lens is actually quite different than what she would have been doing on stage. So I guess a short answer is like, no, but yes.
I'm curious about how Toulouse-Lautrec made his posters. Did he use photographs of her, or did he actually sketch her in person?
That's a great question, and I don't know the answer. We might have curators in the room who have an answer to that question. I don't know. I'm guessing because he was such a consumer of sort of, nightlife, Paris nightlife. I can only assume that he attended her performances, and I'm guessing from the way that he rendered her that it's probably as much based on sort of his own memories, his thoughts. He's sort of adapting what she looked like maybe to sort of his signature style a little bit, because it really both does and doesn't look like her dance, right? It's very exaggerated. The sort of, she's tiny and the robes are enormous. It looks very flattened out in comparison with what it would have looked like in real life. One of the things that I love, though, about that series of prints is that he uses this sort of metallic paint that he splatters onto the print, so it has this sort of glow to it, and it also it kind of captures probably what it was like in a venue like the Folies Bergère, because they're full of dust, right? And so I think, he's really, my guess is that he's thinking more about sort of from his own experience and inventing and sort of creating as much as sort of trying to really replicate something, about, he's not trying to make it look, mimetic, right? Or realistic. But thank you for that question.
Thank you so much. What a just fantastic lecture.
Oh, thank you.
What a joy. I am afraid maybe a kind of an icky question.
Bring it on.
Which I guess is to do also with Rodin's seeming refusal to actually depict her, to use her as a model, which has to do also with her body and also the way that it changes over time, and these sort of magical, weightless effects that she achieves through her performance. And her body is not a classical dancer's body, and
correct.
So I wonder if you could speak to this a little bit.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. Yes, so famously, and I mean, without wanting to sort of body shame Loïe Fuller, right? It was often sort of said that when people met her in person, they were sort of shocked that she wasn't sort of slim and elfin looking, right? I mean, I think that's a really good question, and one that I hadn't necessarily thought about. So I think it maybe requires a little bit more thought. I think there's probably a few reasons why he doesn't want to sculpt her, including, as I was sort of alluding to, I mean, she's she's so ubiquitous, right? And she has sort of created her own image. So he's always going to be derivative, right? He never wants to do that. Secondly, as I was saying, she was a lesbian or woman-loving woman, right? And that doesn't sort of fit into his like, you know, super heterosexual vibe that he wants to give off, right? And as I said, I think that he is really does not want to be associated with his sort of the work that he does in sort of the so-called decorative arts. He's very careful about sort of managing that, you know, essentially trying to make people forget that he had ever done anything like that. I think that he was, you know, he actually was really interested in different kinds, depicting different kinds of bodies that are trained to do all sorts of very complicated things, right? Like there's an amazing scrapbook in the Musée Rodin that lists all of his models. And sometimes he would make little notes about, you know, acrobat, you know, strongman. You know, he would make little notes about sort of what their bodies were like, how, you know, so I think he wasn't necessarily against depicting people who don't have a sort of conventionally ideal form. But I think it bears some sort of thought. So I don't know. Yeah, I appreciate the question, and I'll sort of continue to chew on it a little bit. Yeah, Dave.
I was really struck by the architecture of his pavilion and how conservative it was.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I mean, especially compared to Loïe's.
Yes.
I assume that was probably on purpose, but I don't know if was he involved personally with the design of the actual architecture? Yeah.
Yes, he was involved in every aspect of planning that. And yeah, it is. I'll go back to it because it's so great. Because also, I love how how he put his sculpture of Pierre de Visant outside, like as his another kind of artistic advertisement. I can't, I think, overstate the degree to which he had a chip on his shoulder about the fact that he had sort of not, started out as a, you know, monumental sculptor. He tried 3 times to get into the École des Beaux-Arts and failed all 3 times. Every time he made a sculpture for sort of a, you know, public monument, people would criticize him. I mean, he was super sensitive about all this kind of stuff. So I think the use of this kind of neoclassical, you know, again, as you say, very conservative, very museum looking, right? Sort of architecture is he's trying to sort of proclaim the importance and the gravitas of it. And I think it's also very, as I was sort of hinting at, or maybe, you know, hitting all of you over the head about, he really wants to distinguish it from all the sort of popular culture stuff that you see in the World's Fair. So it's like he really wants this to look like a permanent, you know, sort of high status building. And then, yeah, so Loïe Fuller, her pavilion sort of has this, let me see if I can go back to it. Oh, there we go. It sort of looks like her draperies, right? It's got this sort of flowing Art Nouveau quality to it. I mean, there's so many problems with doing her pavilion that she ended up having to open it several months late. A lot of it had to do apparently with actually with fire protections because of the light that she was using. And so there are all these documents in the Archives Nationales where like she's writing back and forth to the people about like where will the fire extinguishers be. So anyway, I think that she and he had analogous sort of aims in what they wanted their pavilions to do. But of course, each of them had a slightly different physical relationship to the exhibition, and then also a different relationship to sort of what was being offered at the exhibition. So anyway, to your point, I think he really sort of needed to have that sort of, you know, gravitas about it. But then I feel like it's also then undercut by the poster. I don't know. I think there's a lot going on here, in other words, which, I find sort of endlessly fascinating.
What materials did he use in his sculpture?
So it varied. Most of the works that he showed in this particular exhibition were in plaster, right? So they would look, when you look at the photographs here, I can show you that. Yeah. That you get a sense of sort of that all the works have this sort of similar white, you know, look to them. And so part of what I think is the point of that, or the reason for that, is that it's very visually unified. And so that does sort of also help with these sort of ways in which I think he's encouraging people to see them as interacting with each other. of course, there were bronzes of his works that he could have used. There were marble carvings as well. But he chose to use plaster. That was, pretty typical for showing at the Salon, right? Because you'd be usually showing a new work. And to make a bronze cast or a marble carving, you need to invest a lot of money, right? And so you'd sort of want to wait to do that until you have a buyer. So he did do that, and this exhibition was hugely helpful to him in terms of bringing him business. The artwork at the Legion of Honor, there are many. Let's go back to we'll go back many slides. We've got, there we go. Yeah. So yeah, we've got several. We've got St. John the Baptist. We've got the three shades who are taken from the sort of gates of hell and made into their own monumental statuary. He would also change the titles of his sculptures. So like one day he would call it one thing, and then he would like show it another way another time. So I'm not remembering which title he used, or which titles he used for the one on the left of the three shades. But
I feel like we should
yes, please
let you off the hook soon. But I think, Tali, did you have a question?
So I know that Loïe left about years after Rodin.
Yes.
How she continued to associate herself with Rodin after passing, like what were differently?
Yeah, primarily as she had during his lifetime by trying to encourage U.S. collectors to buy his work, to try to organize, exhibitions of his work. And I don't know if any of you have been to the Maryhill Museum. It takes quite a pilgrimage, right, to get there. It's in just over the Oregon-Washington border, right in Washington. And so she also tried to create this sort of museum that would be, for a lot of her sculptures. So she, I think, after the hand dance, I think she thinks of her, the way that she can sort of continue to associate herself with him and sort of bask in the aura of Rodin is mostly through curatorial work and through sort of helping to disseminate his works further and further, but and writing about him, doing things like that. She was sort of very always sort of looking for opportunities to see what she can do with Rodin. So, thank you for that.
Oh yes,
Can I ask one last question?
Yeah, of course.
In the Musée Rodin archives, there are many charming invitations from Loïe to him to come see her perform.
Yeah.
I was wondering, do you have info on, how often he actually took her up on it, and
it's
even like what happened when he would go?
Super hard to tell. So the first ever thing that I can date is that the critic Roger Marx, that Rodin wrote to Roger Marx, and he said, "Thank you. I'm sorry that I missed Loïe Fuller's performance, basically." And he said something like, "I would like to get photographs of her." That was, so that's 1898. That's the first time that I can say for sure that he definitely knew of her. But Roger Marx started writing about her almost immediately after she started performing in 1892 in Paris, and they were, best friends. So for sure he knew about her. But it's very hard to say. Those kinds of things are often not documented, right? There are appointment books in the Musée Rodin, but none that really gave me a very concrete sense of how often he would go to see her. And I should say, to sort of sort of move backwards a little bit, he was pursued by a lot of dancers in this way, right? That he would get telegrams and letters and, all sorts of things inviting him to, to this performance or that performance. Or I was explaining in our previous conversation, there's a great telegram from the dancer Ruth St. Denis to Rodin from London. And she says, "Can I list you as one of my sponsors?" So this was a lot of dancers at this time sort of realize that he has a kind of cachet that they want and need. But yeah, that was one of the most frustrating things about writing this book, is that I often was having to work in the absence of hard evidence. And so you may have noticed that, there were various times when I would say something like, "Well, I believe that," or "I speculate that," right? Because I can't say for sure, but I'm pretty sure. after having looked at and sort of thought about all this, for a long time. It's, as with everything, it's an educated guess. But it's also, I think that's one reason also why there haven't been books like this that sort of take seriously these relationships as relationships between people who, not of necessarily fully equal status, but people who are engaged in a kind of shared project together. Because people, I think scholars previously have been afraid to tread in territory that might be speculative or where we can't say for sure, I know he was there at the Folies Bergère on this date, right? And so I felt like I had to be willing to do that in order to kind of write a narrative that would bring these dancers more fully into the story. Not everybody gets a whole museum devoted to them, right? Like Rodin. And certainly not, there are various collections of, for example, Loïe Fuller's papers, but they're not complete. And she certainly doesn't have a museum that is the Loïe Fuller Museum, unfortunately. If anybody wants to create one, I'd be a fan.
Thank you, Juliet. I think we better wind it up, but thank you for an incredible talk today. It's been absolutely brilliant.
Thank you so much.